Again, Dean Friedrich will come and introduce our honored guest. I'm so thankful for our library and all that they do. To me, it's the coolest library in the world, all right? And so are you not thankful for them? And are you not thankful for our Dean? Dean, come on up.
Thank you, Pastor David. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today a man who has worked as a syndicated columnist, author, and political commentator on the national scene for over 30 years. Mr. Cal Thomas's columns have been published in more than 500 newspapers. He has written 10 books. He has made appearances on NBC Nightly News, Nightline, Good Morning America, CNN's Crossfire, CNBC, and Fox News, among others. Mr. Thomas's long relationship with Liberty University began under founder Dr. Jerry Falwell in the early 80s, and in 2014, Mr. Thomas donated his personal collection of over 3,000 articles to the archives and special collections in the Jerry Falwell Library. Several of Mr. Thomas's children and grandchildren have attended Liberty, so he is both friend and family to Liberty University. After we hear Mr. Thomas speak today, we're going to have a Q&A session. So as he speaks, please think of questions that you may want to ask him, and there will be time for that at the end. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Cal Thomas.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. As Elvis used to say, some of you remember him. I love this school. You are so fortunate to be here. Oh man, if I were your age, I would be here. I would have avoided a lot of mistakes that I made in my life with the kind of education that you're getting here. So God bless you. 35 years ago, in 2 weeks, I wrote my first syndicated column. 35 years. And when I wanted to do research, I had to go to my Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedia, which was outdated the day it was published, or physically leave my house and drive to a library and research there. Now, I can get everything I need on this little device. So incredibly informative. More than 35 years ago, when my parents took a trip, they called the 3 A's and got a map. It was called Triptych. It flipped over like a little reporter's notebook, and it was all outlined in a red or green or something, and my mother would sit in the front seat and tell my dad where to turn and what to do. And now a female voice on my GPS does the same thing. So a woman tells me where to go and what to do. So I haven't really missed anything. But now it's all on this. And the coolest thing of all is the GPS. I punch in, you know this, you punch in where you want to go, it takes you from where you are to where you want to go, all on a GPS. What if we had a God positioning system who would direct us through our lives to our ultimate destination, safely and with strength and encouragement? We do. Last weekend, my wife and I were in Los Angeles and Palm Springs, California, suffering for the Lord. And I saw a commercial on television. It was for McDonald's. They were trying out a new product, bacon fries. Clearly not part of the Nutrisystem diet. Bacon fries. And I thought, well, you know, this is what McDonald's does, and others. When they introduce a new food product, they test market it first to see if it would catch on, if people really liked it. And they'd ask for the response of people, do you like these things? Would you continue to eat them and buy them here? And if they will, then they market it across the country. Now we have somebody who did that, who test marketed all of the ideas that are presented to us in our lifetime. His name was Solomon, and he wrote some of the wisest words that have ever been written in 2 books in Scripture. One is Ecclesiastes, and the other is the Proverbs. Now Solomon said when he was king over Israel, he had access to everything: wine, women, pleasure, money, influence, power, fame, notoriety. He had it all. The wisest man who ever lived, the Scriptures say. I don't know how right that is, because he had more than one wife. It seems to me to be not too smart. But anyway, that was the culture at that time. And so Solomon test marketed all of the ideas available to him at that time. And he found at the end of it all that it was a meaningless journey and a chasing after the wind. He said, whoever has money never has money enough. And at the end he said, so I hated life. So all the things I had gained under the sun, I had to leave to the one who comes after me. That's called an estate sale. You ever been to an estate sale? The furniture, the jewels, the furs, the car, the paintings, everything that you've worked hard to accumulate all of your life is being sold at auction at a fraction of what you paid for it to people you probably didn't know. That's why when Jesus said, what shall it profit a man or a woman if they gain the whole world but lose their own soul? All of it you have to leave, Solomon said, to the one who comes after me. So, why do people go to college? To get a good education, obviously. And why do they get a good education? Well, so they can get a good job and not be a problem to their parents forever. Why do you need a good job? Well, so you can make money. Why do you need money? So you can buy stuff. Why do you need to buy stuff? So you'll be happy. That's the message of the American culture. Get a good education so you can get a good job, so you can make money, so you can buy stuff, so you'll be happy. Do you know what one of the fastest growing institutions in America is these days? Public storage units. I've got one. You put stuff in them that you no longer have room for in your house, and then you pay somebody to store it there. Now, how crazy is that? Let me tell you about my life and how God positioned me to do what I do and to be what I am. I grew up in a nominal Christian home. My parents were good parents. My dad was a World War II veteran, and all of his brothers. They all came back, fortunately. We went to church on Sunday for an hour, and the rest of the week we just lived like pretty much we wanted to. My parents were good people. I made sure they were saved before they passed away. But we had no Bible reading in the home. We didn't pray before meals. My grandfather offered me a silver dollar once if I memorized the 23rd Psalm, and that was the last serious Bible study I did for many years. Oh, I did the things you're supposed to do. I walked down an aisle, I signed a card. Apparently God needs a Rolodex. And went down dry, came up wet, had my fire insurance policy in my back pocket so I wouldn't fry when I died, and sat down in something called a pew, very uncomfortable seating, where I listened to sermons I've long since forgotten, probably about do's and don'ts. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't chew, don't go with girls who do. Don't dance, don't play cards, don't go to movies. Shut yourself away in a spiritual convent and wait till you die and the funeral director's paid off, 90 days, same as cash. Then you'll go to the great pearly gates in the sky where you'll get a harp and a pair of slippers and a robe and wings, and you'll walk down streets of gold humming Amazing Grace. Now, God was on a ceiling in Rome. I'd seen his picture. And I was in Washington trying to get a date on Saturday night. I couldn't really relate. Well, years later, when I had set a goal for myself to be a network television correspondent at NBC News, I started to find out something different about myself and about who God was. I started in radio when I was 16, about 2 weeks after my voice changed. And then I joined NBC News in Washington as a copy boy and met some of the greatest journalists I've ever known. Tremendous influence on me. And by the way, the best way to get an education is not only from your professors, but to find people of integrity in the business or area of interest that you have and ask them to pour their lives into you. That's free, no tuition. It's really great. Oh, by the way, before I forget, President Falwell asked me to announce today that your tuition for this semester has been forgiven and will be rebated. Yeah, it's a cheesy April Fool joke. I'm sorry. Anyway, had to come up with something. And by the way, why am I being asked to speak on April Fool's Day? I mean, who came up with that one? I say to my atheist friends that your name is in the Bible. Oh, yeah? Yeah, it's in the Psalms. A fool has said in his heart there is no God. I was doing Crossfire once. We had the head of the American Atheists on, and I said, why are you always messing with my holidays at Christmas and Easter? I don't mess with yours on April 1st. Huh? Anyway. So, thank you very much. A little late laughter over there, but I do appreciate it. Glad I woke you up. So I did all these things, and then the more I succeeded at NBC, or the money and a certain amount of notoriety and this sort of thing, the less happy I was. Well, my wife began to do some volunteer work at the National Prayer Breakfast Office in Washington, and one day came home and said, I met some men you need to meet. And I went to meet them, and they invited me to a little thing called a prayer breakfast in Washington, a small group of people. And I heard a federal judge stand up that morning and say there's a possibility of everybody in this room to have a personal relationship with Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I'd never heard that phrase before in going to a building called church. I don't recall it. And I said, well, how is that possible? And later they invited me to a Bible study. Now, I'd never studied the Bible, and I heard a man reading from a living paraphrase. And I said, wow, I've never heard words like that before. I've got to get one of these for myself. And so I did. And I started finding out things about God and about myself. I found out that he was holy and I'm not. And that he didn't establish a religion called Christianity. He came to send his son to reestablish a broken relationship. Difference between a religion and a relationship that was destroyed in the Garden of Eden when our first parents sinned, and everyone since has. Big difference. We have to deconstruct. I learned so much stuff that we assume about this person named Jesus of Nazareth. I'll tell you a story. When I was working at CNN for a while before Fox News came along, a producer asked me once, what are you? I said, tall. She said, no. Where do you go to church? I said, I am the church. She said, look, wise guy, what do you do on Sunday morning? I said, well, let's see. Depending on how I feel, I grab a cup of coffee, take a shower, read the newspaper. Read two things every day, my Bible and the New York Times, so I know what each side is doing. She said, look, wise guy, when you leave the house, where do you go? I gave her an address. She said, is there a building there? I said, yes. She said, what's the name of the building? I said, what are you getting at? She said, I want to know what you believe. I said, now we can have a conversation. But we have constructed so much stuff over, around, above, and below this person named Jesus of Nazareth that people find it difficult to get to him. Someone else asked me once, what's your denominational background? I said, 5s, 10s, 20s, 50s, and 100s. I was on Larry King's old show one night, and he said, now, Cal, we all know you're deeply religious. I said, no, I'm not, Larry. He said, you're not? I said, no, I used to be deeply religious. Now I just love Jesus. There's a difference. Larry was so confused, he went to a commercial. But this is it. We got to tear down. We add so much. You know, the man who led me to Christ said, if you want more than Christ, you're really wanting less than Christ, because Christ is God's everything. Now, if you take a glass of Coca-Cola and you pour water in it, pretty soon the Coca-Cola will be diluted. And if you pour the water long enough, it will be replaced by the water. We are adding stuff to Jesus. Agendas, politics, the environment. I'm not saying these things are not important or they shouldn't be addressed, but if they replace or dilute the only person who can change a life, politics can't change a life, environment can't change a life, I can't change a life, only Jesus can change a life. Then we dilute him and replace him with something else. Because if you want more than Jesus, you are subtracting from him. Keep that in mind. It's extremely important. So anyway, I'm learning all of this stuff. And by the time of my 30th birthday, which seems like only yesterday, a major event happened to me. I was fired. Now, I don't recommend that for everybody, but God was forcing me to choose. I was coming to know more about him, but I still wanted to be a big success and star, believing that that would be ultimately fulfilling to me. And so I went to the dark side of the moon for 11 years. I took an enormous pay cut, moved back to Houston, Texas, in a local television station where I had appeared for a couple of years coming up to NBC News. And I felt that I had been forgotten. I had been replaced. My dreams had been crushed. And yet God was building things into me. He put me in touch with people who taught me sound doctrine, who gave me a foundation for my faith. Then he introduced me to a great philosopher theologian named Dr. Francis Schaeffer, who taught me how to think and to process biblical truth through and around, over and above all of the things in our culture and world today. And then something really amazing happened. In 1983, I just decided as a lark, I was still here in Lynchburg, to write a column. I'd never written a column before. Oh, I've written a couple of letters to the editor. All my background was in broadcast news. Never written a column. So I wrote one, and it was called tarring fundamentalists. There have been a lot of stuff in the news about fundamentalist Christians. We're intolerant, bigoted, racist, sexist, homo, the usual line of stuff. And I said, well, this isn't true. Every other area of life, football, whatever it is, you learn the fundamentals, right? So I wrote this, and I said, well, now, where am I going to send this column? Who's going to print this? Oh, what the heck, I'll send it to the New York Times, the least likely paper in the world to print it, other than Pravda in the Soviet Union. So I sent it to the New York Times. They printed it. It's framed, hanging on my office wall. It's a rare document. And I said, well, that was a one-off. So I got another idea for a column, and I wrote one and sent it to the Washington Post. Actually, it was based on Senator Ted Kennedy's visit to Liberty, which I helped to orchestrate. It was called The Man Who Came to Dinner. And there was a cartoon that with it. It had two demons standing outside the White House gate. The headline was, Hell is Frozen Over, when Ted Kennedy would come to Lynchburg. It was very funny. It was a great evening. He spoke on religious liberty. It was a terrific speech. Got a very warm reception from the students, every broadcast network, the newspaper reporters were here. It was fantastic. So I sent that to the Washington Post, and they printed that. Then I sent one to the LA Times, and they printed that. And I'm starting to pray, and I said, Lord, what's going on here? This is ruining my speech on the biased media. So I decided to collect these columns and send them off to various syndicates. Now, syndicates are, they sell newspapers individually, and then your column is syndicated in many different cities. And I got turned down by all of them. And then I remembered a man I'd met, and this is how God works. This is how he positions your life. When Tom Johnson was a White House fellow in the Lyndon Johnson administration, I got to know him a little bit. And I remember that he was publisher of the Los Angeles Times. And so I called him up, and he took my call, and I said, Tom, I think, he's a Democrat, I think there's a lack of good conservative columnists and commentary on the opinion pages in the newspapers today. And he said, well, you may be right. Next time you come out, I'll introduce you to our LA Times syndicate people. And they're autonomous. They make up their own minds, but, you can have a shot at them. So in March of 1984, I flew to Los Angeles, stayed in the LAX Hilton, where I always stay when I go to Los Angeles for the reason that I'm about to tell you. And I literally got down on my knees that morning and asked the Lord to do a greater miracle than Moses parting the Red Sea. I said, I'm asking you to part the liberal mind. And if you do, and if you think I'm ready for it, and I now seek to honor and glorify you and not myself, if you will give me this platform, I will seek to honor you the rest of my life. And I went to lunch with the vice president of the LA Times Syndicate and the chief copy editor. And for an hour, they told me all the reasons they couldn't take on another columnist. And you don't have a newspaper background, day of the columnist is coming to an end, et cetera, et cetera. So I tried between bites of salad to respond to each of their objections. And finally, the vice president of the syndicate turned to me and he said, hey, I hear you're a Christian, is that right? I said, oh, no. Quickly checking my lapels to make sure there was no giveaway jewelry. I said, yeah. He said, well, tell me about that. I said, oh, man, what do I do now? If I'm too forthcoming, they may go back to their boss and say, hey, this guy's religious, put him on the religion page. But a remarkable peace came over me. Maybe recalling my prayer that morning, I spent about 3 or 4 minutes telling them what Jesus of Nazareth had done for me and who he was. And when I finished, the vice president of the syndicate turned to the chief copy editor and said, isn't so-and-so leaving us in April? And she said, yes, I'd forgotten that. And he turned to me and said, can you do 2 columns a week for us beginning April 17th? 35 years ago. Never missed a deadline, 2 per week. Do the math. Over 3,000. Many of them are in the library, I'm proud to say. And I am convinced that God was communicating with the other 2 immediate members of his family, meaning the Son and the Holy Spirit, saying, let's see if this idiot's learned anything. And if he has, we will give him the desire of his heart. And you know what had happened? The desire of my heart had changed. The desire of my heart had become to honor and glorify God. And this is why I have engraved on the back of my watch, 1 Samuel 2:30, he who honors me, I will honor. Everything in Scripture is the reverse of the way men and women think. We seek to honor ourselves, God opposes pride. We seek to elevate ourselves, God raises the humble. the widow's mite, the mustard seed, the last place at the table. When I'm weak, then I'm strong. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and I will exalt you in due time if you faint not. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. He repeats it over and over and over because we are stupid and we won't listen, and we put our trust in princes and kings. Now, sure, there are certain political leaders that I like better than others. Of course there are, because they stand for different principles. But I don't put my ultimate trust in them because they can't reach the heart. No politician can change your life. Only you can do that by the way you study and achieve, by the person you ultimately marry, by the parent you become. Only God can direct your life. Only He can position your life through a God-positioning system. Now, the world comes in with all kinds of promises and claims that it can never fulfill. And yet, the God of the universe has heard and seen it all before. We are not the first, this is breaking news, we are not the first people to walk the earth. We don't have to invent the wheel or discover the use of fire. It's all been done before. If you're going on a trip to a place you've never been before, what do? You either get a guidebook or you go online, you research the places you can afford to stay in a hotel, good restaurants, tourist attractions, information. And why do you trust that? Because you know that the people who have written this have been there. They've done it. They've stayed in the hotels. They have eaten in the restaurants. They have visited the tourist attractions. And so you trust them because you believe them. This is exactly what Scripture is about. This is our God positioning system for your life and for mine. He's been there. He's seen it. He knows your nature. He knows what Jesus can do for you in repositioning your life and giving you direction and hope, a purpose for living on this earth and a future with Him, if you let Him. Now, if I take this thing out and I punch in an address and it gives me directions and I say, I know a better way than that. I don't need that. I can do my own way, and you get lost. That's what we do today. Well, we're calling God a liar when we do that, aren't we? There was a show many years ago, a Broadway show called Carnival. It's one of my favorite musicals of all time. You'll see a little bit of the showbiz that I wanted to do coming out of me now. And it was written by a guy named Bob Merrill, who also wrote Funny Girl for Barbra Streisand, a tremendously talented man. And the song he wrote was, I've got to find a reason for living on this earth. I've got to find a reason for breathing the air I breathe, taking the space I take. There's more to me, there's more to this, something in me that needs to do more than suck the breath of life as moths and weeds and leaves do. Holding up my head, holding down a place, being worth a name to go with my face. I've got to find a reason for living on this earth. Something to want, something to be, somehow to say, I am me. It's a beautiful lyric. It's the cry of all humanity. When I speak at pregnancy center fundraisers, I usually open by asking a question. Who are you? Oh, I met some of you. You have name tags. Your name is Sally or George or Frank or Hakeem or whatever it is. But is that who you are? There are only two answers to who am I. One is the world's answer. I'm material and energy shaped by pure chance in a random universe, with no author of life, no purpose for living, and no destination after I die. A little more complex than the food you may eat on campus, but of no greater moral significance. Eat, drink, and be merry, for after that we die. That's one answer to the question, who are you? The other answer is, I am created in the image and likeness of an objectively existing God who loves me and has a plan for my life, and if I will allow Him to position it, I will not only find meaning and purpose in this life, regardless of what I do, but I will have the promise of heaven and eternity with the Lord Jesus and my friends and relatives who have gone before me. Those are the two answers to the question, who am I? Now, the world throws in all kinds of things. You know, we've had this debate, and we're going to have it again in the next presidential campaign, about income inequality. Another one of these buzzwords. I wrote a column a few months ago, and I said, I have a deep, dark secret that I've kept hidden for many years, but I feel an obligation to share it publicly now. I suffer from income inequality. Oh, the shame, the shame. Yes, there are always people who are making and will make more than I do, but I don't envy them. I've found that rich people are some of the most miserable people I've ever met, because not only do they have to make it, they have to hold on to it. And the people they know are not their real friends. They just want a piece of the action. You know, you hear about these lottery winners. Hey, $300 million, hey, to only one ticket holder. Do you ever read the stories of those people after they won? Their lives are so often ruined. Relatives they never thought they had came out of the woodwork. People felt entitled, that's a word I hate, entitled to that money. Families are destroyed. Divorce, alcoholism, all kinds of things come out of this. So wealth is not the answer. Well, neither is poverty. You know, Tevye says in Fiddler on the Roof, it's no sin to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So how do we help the poor? We help them by helping them become unpoor. That's the difference between the right and the left in America. The left wants to just give them more government programs. Did you know that over $1 trillion has been spent on anti-poverty programs since the Great Society started in 1965, and that we have just as many poor people today as we did then? It's true, look it up. So that money is not the answer. Purpose and meaning in life is the answer. And you don't find that anywhere. You don't find it in Hollywood. You don't find it on TV, unless you listen to certain really great preachers like Charles Stanley. You don't find it anywhere else except in a personal relationship with Jesus of Nazareth, who again did not come to establish a religion. You'll never see the word Christianity in Scripture, but came to reestablish a broken relationship. And he did that by living a perfect life, dying on the cross, shedding his blood for each of us, and saying that all you have to do is acknowledge what you know deep in your heart, you really are, and that is a sinner. We spend money on doctors and psychiatrists to tell us, you're not a sinner. You do bad things because your mother loved your sister more than you. You didn't get your dog that you wanted when you were 4 years old. You're depraved on account of you're deprived. Line from West Side Story. But it's true, it's a condition we inherit from our first parents. And Jesus says, if you'll simply acknowledge that you are a sinner and repent, a very important thing to do, and invite Jesus, not religion, into your life, I'll give you a new life, the life I originally created you to be, and that I will restore you to what God wanted you to be. And then in the end, when the tree of life comes back in Revelation, the first thing taken away, the last thing restored, you will be with me forever. There is a promise no politician or any other person on this earth can make. Again, it's not religion, it's a relationship. I know many of you have discovered that, but I also know that some of you have come to this university because you were forced to by a parent or grandparent who said they wouldn't pay for your college education unless you came to a place like Liberty. But this is the way God works, certainly the way He worked in my life. He puts you in circumstances, in positions with His God positioning system in order that you might hear that God loves you more than anything else that anyone else ever could, more than a husband, a wife, a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, more, far more. And that if you will simply, you don't have to do anything. He's even done salvation for you. Galatians 2:20, you know, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet the life I live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God. It's not even my faith. He gives me my own faith. He gives you everything. It's better than somebody paying your tuition, your room and board. It's better than living in your parents' basement because you majored in the wrong thing. It's better than all of that. It's free because He paid it all. Jesus paid it all. All to Him I owe. Sin had cast a crimson tide. He washed me white as snow. What a great promise. I hope if you've never considered seriously the person of Jesus of Nazareth, you will do so this morning or this semester while you're here at this great university. And you've heard this not from me, because I asked God to give me the words to say this morning. And I trust that he has, and I trust that it's been a blessing to you. Now we're going to take a few minutes to have some questions, something that's not often done, I understand, here at Convo. We'll have a special line for women who want to know how they can find a husband like me. That's fine. Just kidding, just kidding. And I'm very blessed to have my wife of 8 months here today. We have a great story. If you really want to see a cool love story, you Google Love is Patient, and Keys Press, the local paper in the Florida Keys, did a story on us. We were high school classmates. God brought us together after 50-some years. It's wonderful. Love it. All right. Who we have down here? Are we doing the, oh, hello, David, you're back. David's making a second coming.
All right, so thank you, sir. The way we'll do our question and format is there is a microphone on this side of the aisle and this one. You can go ahead and get in line, and then we'll just try to do about 15 minutes of Q&A. I have an initial one. We're good friends, obviously, with our founder, Jerry Falwell Sr. You probably have 1,000 war stories from your moral majority days and other stories that about your personal friendship. Is there one story that comes to mind that you can share with us to give us a window into who he was as a leader?
He was a terrific preacher. When he was on his game, and I mean, he was, I mean, you can see his videos and stuff. Just a tremendous preacher, and a clown. I mean, he would do things. I remember one morning we were going to appear on, I think, CBS Morning News. Got up early, and we're going down the hall of our hotel. And it's like 6 in the morning. He knocked on somebody else's door and ran to the elevator so that I'm left in front of the guy's door who thought I was, what? One time he rolled a cherry bomb down the island of the plane. The aisle of the plane. It was terrible. Coming out of New York once.
While the plane was in the air?
Yeah. It was crazy. He'd probably be in jail today if he did that. And then another time we were leaving New York, and he told the pilot of the plane to put it into a deep dive to scare the heck out of us. I mean, it was really funny. He was a character. But he also, I remember I took him to Washington once and introduced him to an inner city pastor. And there were a lot of poor people there. And he was particularly taken by this one young African-American boy. And he invited him in the car to go back to the airport with us before we came back to Lynchburg. And he said, here's my personal phone number. When you graduate from high school, I'm going to give you a scholarship to Liberty University. I almost cried when I saw that. He was so generous and did things like that the media always, ignored, because the stereotype, well, if you're a serious believer, you're against everybody. I remember a sermon he gave once, this was so great, in Baltimore. I got a lot of stories. In Baltimore, at an African-American church, and he stood up and he talked about racism. And he talked about growing up in the South and how white churches wouldn't baptize black people. And this is the stuff that he grew up with. And he realized after his conversion, and it took a while, that this was a sin. The black pastor got up. I'm quoting him verbatim. He said, I'm not so much interested in where a man was 25 years ago as I am where he is today. And that's the power of Christ. He did all kinds of stuff like that you'd never read about, and he's a wonderful man. I walked into his office today at the mansion, and just stood there a moment and said some things to him. He meant a lot to me. He rescued me and gave me a platform that allowed my syndicated column to begin, and I will forever be grateful to him for that.
Thank you, sir. First question here, and then we'll go to this side.
Hi, tell me who you are and where you're from. That's you.
Yeah.
Hey.
You're next on The Price is Right.
Well,
all right.
You might be my long-lost cousin, because my name's Stephen Thomas.
Really?
Yeah, originally from India.
I've eaten at an Indian restaurant. Maybe there's some connection there.
A little bit. So the question that I wanted to ask was, just thank you again for being faithful. You said you've never missed a deadline in all these years.
Yeah.
If we could read one piece of something you've written, either a book or an article, what would you suggest that we dive into?
Well, you go to my webpage, calthomas.com, and read for yourself. Well, the first column I wrote for syndication was called "The Children of Divorce." I saw a little girl sitting across the aisle from me hugging a Cabbage Patch doll, which was popular at the time. And things being where they are, I wasn't going to go over and touch her or try to comfort her, so I called for the flight attendant, and I said, can you help this little girl here? And she said, oh, we get those kinds all the time. I said, what do you mean, those kinds? She said, the children of divorce. And that was the title of my column. And I went and did some research and the consequences to children of people who divorce. And wasn't judgmental. It was just, it was like a ripple effect, like dropping a stone in the water. It's going to ripple. So I do remember that. I mean, I've got one coming up tomorrow on the whole immigration and the president's threat to close the border, which I endorse until we get things sorted out. Can't have 100,000 people a month flooding into America. We don't know who they are. Probably terrorists among them. But let's do an Ancestry.com thing and see if we got anything going there, okay? Hey, who are you?
Hey, my name's Zach.
Hey, Zach, where are you from?
From North Carolina.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I just have a question. To preface it, I'm a musician, and I've noticed over the past 10, 15 years, music distribution changed completely over the course of, computers rising, digital era. How, working in the news industry, have you seen that change over your 35 years? And where do you see it going in the next 5, 10 years?
When I was at NBC, the evening newscasts were 15 minutes long. 15 minutes. Then they decided to go to 30 minutes, and the big concern was, golly, will we have enough to report? Now it's 24/7, which has its pluses and minuses. I think, digital, streaming, you can be your own editor, you can be your own commentator on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, just about anything, Twitter. You can be your own commentator. You can do your own videos. You upload them to YouTube. So I think that has empowered the individual in just about every field, including music and news and everything else you want to do. That can be a good thing, but, like fire, properly contained, it warms, it cooks, but let out of its containment, it can burn down your house. So there are good and bad things. A lot of bad stuff on the internet. You shouldn't believe everything you read, unless I write it, of course. Yeah.
So can I ask you just on top of that?
Yeah.
So it's a really great question because as a musician, he's one of our best on campus.
What do you play?
I play drums.
Oh, good.
If he's going to go do records and be a big-time musician, meaning like
Records, what's that?
Exactly. What does that look like? They used to be able to budget a couple $1 million and do an album, and then they would sell them. Now with streaming, the royalties are shrinking. Does that kind of walk into the life of a columnist as well? Newsweek, New York Times, Time Magazine, their publication side is shrinking.
Yeah.
And so how do they continue to be relevant, continue to have big voices, as far as writers? Because the money's going away in one sense as the internet's come in.
Well, I'm in a unique position. I compare myself to a multi-engine jet. If one engine goes down, I'm still flying. So I have the column, I do speaking, I do radio, I used to do TV before I got too old. Fox didn't renew my contract after 19 years. I said, I'll dye my hair blonde, I'm just not having the surgery. So, they didn't buy it. But anyhow, so it would be good, particularly in a very volatile industry like journalism, music, whatever, to have a fallback position just in case. So you don't put all your investment in one thing and then find at the end of it you don't have anything and you're back living in your parents' basement. As nice as your parents probably are, they like to see you be. I mean, it's tough out there. I had a grandson who wanted to be a drummer, and he realized that there just wasn't enough market. He wasn't good enough or something, and so he got a job with Microsoft, which is not too bad.
Whenever I go to Starbucks, I always ask my barista, now what band are you in? So just for that. All right, Nick, come on up.
If you see La La Land, there's a great thing on that. Hey, don't tell me they ask if you played basketball, right?
Actually, tennis.
What?
Tennis. He said actually tennis.
Yeah.
That man right there played for Virginia Tech.
All right.
He's one of the godliest men I know. He has lost recently, as big as he is. He's recently, how much weight have you lost recently?
Probably close to 70-something pounds.
70 pounds. He's getting ready. I mean, he's an MMA fighter now, so
Wow.
he's getting ready to.
Well, you could be on with, what's her name on Nutrisystem, but go ahead.
Oh, Jillian Michaels.
Yeah, where are you from?
I'm from Richmond, Virginia.
Oh, great.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So my question was, if you had one book to recommend, right, that you read that took your breath away, that kind of formed your life mantra besides the Bible, what would that book be?
John. Book of John.
Book of John.
He's saying beside the Bible. Was
Oh,
there
beside
one?
the Bible.
Yes,
I didn't
sir.
hear that part. Yeah. What? Yes, David Nasser's testimony.
It's a riveting coloring book.
Yeah.
Comes with crayons.
I think, money back guarantee. If they don't like it, you guarantee not to give their money back. But anyway, I think it's very important to learn how to process information. And the person who taught me that, I mentioned him earlier, was Dr. Francis Schaeffer. Any of his books, but especially The God Who Is There and True Spirituality are the two best that I found for processing the truth of God through all of the anti-God philosophies and information comes along. You'll find your own, but those two are really, really good, and I would recommend them. Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey.
Hi, Lou Whiter.
Lou, are you a slow student or?
Yes,
Are you?
You're always a student, but I'm a professor here
Always
as well.
learning.
And I work for
Okay,
OSD for Pastor
good.
David. Yeah.
Good.
In 1984, I was an intern in Washington with Moral Majority. I saw the left and the right have a mantra, if you will, of you do whatever it takes to get the job done, and the ends justify the means. So both sides had that struggle. What advice would you give our students to avoid the trappings of those two philosophies in life?
Well, you know, in a GPS, all that's necessary is to be infinitesimally off mark. It doesn't have to be even discernible, and you'll miss the target, whether it's the moon or the International Space Station or whatever. It has to be precise. And Satan's great lie is to he doesn't come at you at your front door, ring the doorbell, and you open it and say, want to go to hell today? I mean, most people would slam the door faster than if it was a Jehovah's Witness. No disrespect, man. So he just wants to get you off a little bit. Focus on the world, not on the kingdom that is forever. In the greatest church-state moment ever, when Jesus stood before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate said, don't you realize I have the power of life and death over you? And Jesus replied, you wouldn't have that power if my Father hadn't given it to you. And my kingdom is not of this world, he said. That's the most profound statement. If you keep your focus on the kingdom that is not of this world, where you're going to spend most of your time, let's face it, you're never going to be disappointed. But the great error of all of these political religious groups was the presumption, not necessarily stated, but presumed, that you're going to get trickle-down morality from Washington, from politicians who have difficulty, you may have noticed, imposing it upon themselves, and it's just not going to happen. A changed life comes from within, not from without. Jesus said, don't put your trust in princes and kings, and I would say that includes Republicans, Democrats, liberals, mushy moderates, and everybody else.
Well, one last question. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. Go ahead.
My name's Opal. I've been reading your book, What Works.
Oh, you're the one reader. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great, y'all. And it really focused on a few things that work and that don't. And looking at the millennial generation, I see that they focus a lot on what you say doesn't work: broken families, entitlement, abortion. And recently in conservative media, there's been this line that this is, the generation after millennials is the new pro-life generation, or the most conservative generation to come. Do you think that's the case? Do you think that's wishful thinking? Or do you think younger people are aligning with what does work?
Well, it's a great question. I appreciate their plug for the book, too. It's hard to say, hard to make generalizations. I have heard, and I think I've spoken at enough pregnancy center fundraisers, I think those of your generation are more pro-life because they've seen, after 60 million abortions, and there have been plenty of women around now you can talk to who regret them tremendously. Many have turned to alcohol, promiscuous sex, broken relationships. I've seen them, I've heard from them, I've known some of them. Some of them are clinic directors, pro-life clinic directors around the country. So there's a lot of evidence out there now. And I think people of your generation are seeing it and seeing the destruction that is caused not only to the unborn. There's this brand new movie out, which I really encourage you to see if you can, called Unplanned. It's about a former Planned Parenthood director who actually was called in to look at the ultrasound, and this is our great pro-life weapon to over 90% of abortion-minded women who see an ultrasound of their own child, not a film, not a model, choose to give the child birth because they've been lied to. They've been pressured by boyfriends and parents or husbands or whatever. And so I just think getting the information out there and all the answers, this is one of the things that Dr. Falwell did, is starting a pregnancy help center here in Lynchburg and back in the 80s. all the questions have been answered. Who's going to care for the baby after it's born? Not a problem. Who's going to take care of the woman and help her? Not a problem. All of these services are free at the pregnancy centers. All the so-called services at the abortion clinics cost money. So who really cares for women? And I think we have the stronger argument. Let God be God. I mean, I've talked to women who, very difficult circumstances, became pregnant out of wedlock and decided to have their babies. I did one in, I think it was Tampa, Florida, some years ago. It was 25th anniversary. And they brought back women from the 25 years that they had helped and their babies, some of whom were grown. And they put them up on the stage in a tableau. It was unbelievable. I cried. It was beautiful. We have the power with the sonograms now to tell the truth. So I say, I'm for empowering women. I'm for giving them more information so they can make informed choices. But the left is against it because they know to give them more information, including pictures, means they'll make a different choice and Planned Parenthood will be out of business, which I'm all for. Okay?
Preach, brother.
Hey, we'll be an offering.
Hey, can we thank Cal? Just an amazing job, Mr. Thomas. Such an honor to have you with us. Thanks for being here today. You obviously are dismissed. Man, may the Lord bless you, may he keep you, and may he shine his face upon you. Thank you. Bye-bye.